The rain was coming down hard that Tuesday night in October when Sarah Martinez heard the first sound that would change everything. It wasn't the thunder she'd been expecting, or even the crash of a tree branch against their suburban Cleveland home. It was Max, their 3-year-old German Shepherd mix. Letting out a low, menacing growl from his spot by the living room window, Sarah muted the TV and listened. Her husband David was upstairs putting their twin 70-year-olds, Emma and Jake, to bed after what had been a typical chaotic Tuesday evening of homework battles and dinner negotiations. The house should have been settling into its usual peaceful rhythm, but Max's body language told a different story entirely. "What is it, boy?" Sarah whispered, moving toward the window where Max stood rigid, his ears perked forward and his hackles raised. She'd never seen him like this before. Max was typically the neighborhood's gentle giant, the dog who let toddlers climb on him at the local park and had never so much as snapped at another animal through the rain-streaked glass. Sarah could barely make out the shapes moving in their backyard. At first, she thought it might be raccoons getting into their garbage cans again, but as her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she realized these shapes were too large, too deliberate in their movements. 2 men in dark hoodies were crouched near their back door, one of them working something into the lock while the other kept watch. Sarah's blood ran cold. Her phone was upstairs, charging in the bedroom, and the landline was in the kitchen between her and whoever was trying to break into their home. Max's growl deepened, and suddenly he was no longer the playful family pet she'd rescued from the shelter 2 years ago. Every muscle in his 70-pound frame was tense, ready for action. Sarah had heard that dogs could sense danger long before humans could, but she'd never witnessed it firsthand until this moment. "David," she called out as loudly as she dared, hoping her voice would carry upstairs without alerting the intruders. "David, come down here now." But her husband was deep in bedtime story mode, probably doing his infamous Darth Vader voice that always made the twins dissolve into giggles. The sound of his animated reading drifted down the stairs. Masking her urgent whispers, the metallic scraping at the back door continued. Sarah's mind raced through their options. The front door was only 20 feet away, but it would mean abandoning David and the children upstairs. She could try to make it to the kitchen phone, but that would put her directly in the path of whoever was coming through that back door. Max made the decision for her. Without warning, he erupted into the most ferocious barking Sarah had ever heard. It wasn't his usual happy bark or even his territorial someone's at the door bark. This was primal, protective, and absolutely terrifying. The sound echoed through their split-level home like a fire alarm. Upstairs, Sarah heard David's voice stop mid-sentence, followed by the twins asking what was wrong with Max. Within seconds, she could hear her husband's footsteps moving across the bedroom floor. But the barking had also alerted the intruders. Through the window, Sarah watched as the 2 figures abandoned their careful approach to the lock and simply kicked at the door. The sound of splintering would mix with Max's relentless barking, creating a symphony of chaos that shattered the peaceful suburban night. "Sarah, what's happening?" David's voice came from the top of the stairs, urgent but still not understanding the full gravity of the situation. "Call 911. Sarah screamed back. "Someone's breaking in." The back door gave way with a final, violent crash. Max was already in motion, his powerful legs propelling him toward the kitchen with a speed and purpose that took Sarah's breath away. She'd seen him run before, chasing tennis balls at the park, racing the twins around their backyard, but this was different. This was a dog transformed by an ancient instinct to protect his pack. The first intruder stumbled through the broken doorway, a crowbar in one hand and what looked like a small pistol in the other. He was young, maybe early 20s, with the jittery movements of someone high on something stronger than adrenaline. His partner followed close behind, taller and more composed, carrying what Sarah's mind registered as a much larger gun. Max hit the first intruder like a missile, 70 pounds of pure protective fury, launching through the air. The young man went down hard, his weapon skittering across the kitchen tile as Max's jaws clamped down on his arm. The sound that came from the intruder was part scream, part sob, completely human and utterly terrified. "Get it off me," he shrieked, trying to shake Max loose while his partner raised his weapon. "Get it off." Sarah watched in horror as the second man pointed his gun directly at Max. Time seemed to slow down, each second stretching into an eternity. She could hear David on the phone upstairs, his voice urgent as he spoke to the 911 dispatcher. She could hear Emma and Jake crying, their small voices asking why Max was being so loud, why Daddy sounded scared. "Max, no," Sarah screamed, but she knew it was too late. The gunshot exploded through their home like thunder, louder than any sound Sarah had ever heard. Max's powerful body jerked, but he didn't let go of the intruder's arm. If anything, his grip seemed to tighten, his protective instincts overriding what must have been incredible pain. The wounded intruder was still screaming, blood from Max's bite mixing with the rainwater that had followed the men into the kitchen. His partner was already backing toward the broken door, his eyes wide with panic. This had clearly gone nothing like they'd planned. "We gotta go, man," the taller one shouted. "Someone called the cops." But Max wasn't done. Despite the spreading dark stain across his golden coat, despite the way his hind legs were beginning to tremble, he maintained his grip on the first intruder. His dark eyes, usually so gentle and playful, burned with a fierce determination that spoke to thousands of years of canine evolution, the unwavering drive to protect the family above all. Else. Sarah heard sirens in the distance, still blocks away but getting closer. The second intruder grabbed his wounded partner and practically dragged him toward the door. Max finally released his grip, but only to position himself between the retreating men and the stairway where his family waited. Even as blood pooled beneath him on the kitchen floor, Max stood guard. His legs shook with the effort, and Sarah could see that each breath was a struggle, but he didn't move from his protective stance until both intruders had disappeared into the rainy night. Only then did Max allow himself to collapse. "David!" Sarah screamed, rushing to Max's side. "David, get down here now." Her husband appeared at the top of the stairs, phone still pressed to his ear, and immediately understood the situation. "The police are 2 minutes out," he told the dispatcher, then covered the phone with his hand. "How bad is it?" Sarah's hands hovered over Max's prone form, afraid to touch him but desperate to help. The bullet had caught him in the chest, just below his right shoulder. His breathing was shallow and rapid, and his usually bright eyes seemed unfocused. I think he's dying," Sarah whispered. David finished with the 911 dispatcher and rushed down the stairs. Behind him, Emma and Jake appeared at the top, landing in their pajamas, their faces streaked with tears. "Is Max okay?" Emma called down, her voice small and frightened. "Stay upstairs, guys," David said firmly but gently. "Max is hurt, but the doctors are coming to help him." The next few minutes passed in a blur of sirens, flashing lights, and urgent voices. The paramedics arrived first, followed closely by 3 police cruisers, while the officers secured the scene and began collecting evidence from the broken door and scattered blood. The paramedics worked on Max. "We need to get him to the emergency vet clinic right now," one of them said after a quick examination. "He's lost a lot of blood, but he's still fighting." Sarah rode in the back of David's SUV, Max's head cradled in her lap, while David followed the paramedics' directions to the 24-hour animal hospital across town. Max's breathing was getting weaker, but every few minutes his eyes would flutter open and find Sarah's face, as if he needed to make sure she was still safe. "You're such a good boy," she whispered, stroking his ears. "Such a brave, good boy. You saved us all." The emergency vet clinic was a blur of stainless steel and fluorescent lights. Dr. Patricia Williams, the veterinary surgeon on duty, took one look at Max and immediately began barking orders to her staff. Within minutes, Max had disappeared behind the doors marked "Authorized Personnel Only," leaving Sarah and David to wait in a sterile room that smelled of disinfectant and fear. The twins had been left with their neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who had rushed over as soon as she heard the sirens. Now Sarah and David sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs, holding hands and trying to process what had just happened. "He knew," Sarah said quietly. "Before I even saw them, Max knew they were there." David nodded. "Dogs can hear frequencies we can't. Probably picked up on them long before they got to the door. But it's more than that," Sarah continued. "The way he positioned himself, the way he kept fighting even after. Did you see his eyes? He knew exactly what he was doing." They sat in silence for several minutes, the only sound the soft hum of medical equipment from somewhere deeper in the clinic. Sarah kept thinking about Max's last moments of consciousness at home, how he'd looked at each of them as if memorizing their faces, how he'd struggled to stay standing until he was absolutely certain the threat was gone. Dr. Williams emerged from the surgery suite nearly 3 hours later, still wearing her surgical scrubs and a grave expression that made Sarah's heart sink. The bullet missed his heart by less than an inch. She began without preamble. "It punctured his right lung and fractured 2 ribs, but we were able to remove it successfully. The blood loss was significant, and he went into shock twice during surgery." Sarah gripped David's hand tighter. "But he's going to be okay." Dr. Williams hesitated. "The next 24 hours will be critical. He's young and strong, which works in his favor. But injuries like this, there's always a risk of complications. Infection, internal bleeding, pneumonia from the lung damage." "Can we see him?" David asked. "He's still under anesthesia, but you can sit with him." Sometimes familiar voices help during recovery. Max looked impossibly small on the veterinary hospital bed, connected to what seemed like dozens of tubes and wires. His chest rose and fell with mechanical precision, assisted by a ventilator that breathed for him while his punctured lung healed. The golden coat that Emma loved to brush was partially shaved, revealing the stark surgical tape and bandages that covered his wounds. Sarah pulled a chair close to his bedside and began talking to him in the same soft voice she used when he was anxious during thunderstorms. She told him about how the police had caught the intruders 6 blocks away, the injured one bleeding heavily from Max's bite, and both of them facing charges of breaking and entering, assault, and weapons violations. She told him how Emma and Jake had insisted on making get-well cards, even though it was past midnight. how Mrs. Chen had brought over homemade soup and had cried when she heard what Max had done for their family, how the local news station wanted to do a story about his heroism, but mostly, she just thanked him. Over and over, she whispered words of gratitude for his courage, his loyalty, his unwavering love for their family. David took the next shift, reading to Max from the sports pages and sharing updates about the Cleveland Browns' upcoming game. It was silly, but Max had always seemed interested in football, often positioning himself in front of the TV during games as if he understood what was happening. The twins visited on Wednesday evening, their small faces solemn as they approached Max's bedside. Emma had brought his favorite tennis ball, while Jake clutched a drawing of Max wearing a superhero cape. "Is he dreaming?" Emma whispered, watching Max's eyes move beneath his closed lids. "I think so," Sarah replied, "probably dreaming about chasing squirrels in the park." Jake carefully placed his drawing where Max could see it when he woke up. "I drew him flying," he explained, "because he's our hero." Thursday morning brought the first sign of hope. Dr. Williams was able to remove the ventilator, and Max began breathing on his own. His vital signs strengthened throughout the day, and by evening he was able to lift his head slightly when Sarah spoke to him. "Welcome back, brave boy," she whispered, gently stroking his muzzle. Max's tail managed a weak wag just once, but it was enough to make Sarah cry with relief. Friday brought even more progress. Max was able to drink small amounts of water and even managed to eat a few bites of his favorite food. The antibiotics were keeping infection at bay, and the chest x-rays showed his lung was healing better than expected. But it was Saturday morning when Max truly returned to them. Sarah arrived at the clinic to find him sitting up in his bed, tail wagging with something approaching his normal enthusiasm. When he saw her, he tried to stand, earning a gentle but firm correction from the veterinary technician. "Easy there, hero," the tech said with a smile. "You're not quite ready for gymnastics yet." Dr. Williams was cautiously optimistic. "His recovery has been remarkable," she admitted. "Dogs are incredibly resilient. But Max seems determined to get back to his family." The determination was evident in everything Max did over the next few days. He worked with the physical therapy team to regain his strength, endured his medications without complaint, and greeted each visitor with the gentle spirit that had made him such a beloved family member. The local news story aired the following week, just as Max was finally cleared to come home. The reporter, a young woman named Jessica Torres, interviewed the family in their living room, the same room where Max had first sensed danger that rainy October night. "Max isn't just a pet," Sarah told the camera, one hand resting on Max's head as he sat beside her on the couch. "He's a member of our family, and when our family was threatened, he didn't hesitate to put himself in harm's way to protect us." The story resonated far beyond Cleveland. Within days, Max's tale of heroism had been shared thousands of times on social media, picked up by national news outlets, and featured on morning talk shows across the country. Letters and cards arrived from around the world, many from military families and first responders who understood the kind of courage Max had displayed. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The American Kennel Club, in partnership with a national animal welfare organization, announced the creation of the Max Martinez Award, an annual honor recognizing dogs who risk their lives to protect their families. The ceremony took place in their backyard on a crisp November morning, exactly 1 month after the break-in. Max wore a special collar for the occasion, a gift from Emma and Jake that featured a small medal engraved with the word hero. As the photographer captured the moment, Sarah reflected on how much their lives had changed in such a short time. The broken back door had been replaced with a steel security door. They'd installed a comprehensive alarm system and motion sensor lights around the entire house. David had even talked about getting a second dog, not as a replacement for Max, but as a companion who might share the protective duties. But the biggest change was in how they saw Max himself. He was still the same gentle giant who let the twins dress him up in silly costumes and who begged for table scraps with those impossibly expressive eyes. But now they understood the depth of his loyalty, the fierce protective instinct that lay beneath his playful exterior. Dr. Williams attended the ceremony, bringing with her the bullet that had nearly taken Max's life. It was smaller than Sarah had expected, a piece of metal that seemed insignificant compared to the courage it had taken to stop it. In 20 years of veterinary medicine, Dr. Williams told the gathered crowd of neighbors, friends, and reporters, "I've never seen anything quite like Max's recovery. He had every medical reason to give up, but something kept him fighting. I think that something was love, pure, unconditional love for his family." Max seemed to understand that the ceremony was about him, though he was more interested in the hot dogs someone had brought than in the speeches being made in his honor. He moved a little more slowly than before, and Dr. Williams had warned that he might always have some limitations from his lung injury. But his spirit was unchanged, gentle with children, patient with adults, and eternally optimistic about the possibility of walks, treats, and games of fetch. As the guests began to leave and the afternoon wound down, the Martinez family found themselves alone in their backyard with their hero. Emma and Jake were playing with Max, being extra careful around his healing wounds but unable to resist their usual cuddle session. Do you think he understands what he did? David asked, watching Max patiently endure Jake's attempt to teach him to high-five with his uninjured paw. Sarah considered the question. I think he understands that we're safe, she said finally. And for Max, that's all that matters. That night, as they settled into their new bedtime routine, now complete with multiple locks, alarm settings, and security checks, Max took his usual position at the foot of Emma and Jake's beds. Sarah watched from the doorway as he made his rounds, gently nuzzling each sleeping child before settling down in the hallway where he could keep watch over the entire upstairs. Some things, Sarah realized, would never change. Max was still their protector, still their guardian, still the dog who would do anything to keep his family safe. The only difference now was that they all understood just how far anything might go. 6 months later, as spring arrived in Cleveland and the trauma of that October night began to fade into memory, Max was fully recovered. He ran with the same enthusiasm, played with the same joy, and loved with the same boundless devotion that had always defined him. But sometimes, on quiet evenings when the family gathered in the living room, Sarah would catch Max staring out that same window where he'd first detected danger. His ears would perk up at sounds only he could hear. His body would tense with familiar alertness, and for just a moment, she would see the guardian beneath the gentle family pet. In those moments, Sarah was reminded that heroism isn't about the absence of fear, it's about acting with love despite that fear. Max had been afraid that night. She was certain of it, but his love for his family had been stronger than his fear, stronger than his pain, stronger even than his instinct for self-preservation. That was the real miracle of Max's story, not that a dog had protected his family, but that love had triumphed over everything else. It was a lesson that resonated far beyond their suburban home, reaching people around the world who needed to be reminded that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes the greatest heroes walk on 4 legs instead of 2. As Sarah tucked the twins into bed that spring evening, Jake looked up at her with the serious expression he wore when asking important questions. "Mom," he said, "do you think Max knows he's famous?" Sarah glanced over at Max, who was already settling into his protective position in the hallway, and smiled. "I think Max knows he's loved," she replied, "and that's the only fame that matters to him." Outside, the Cleveland suburbs settled into their peaceful rhythm, watched over by countless families and their faithful companions. And in one particular house on Maple Street, a hero named Max kept guard, ready once again to risk everything for the people he loved most in the world. The bullet scar beneath his golden coat had healed into barely visible reminder of that terrifying night, but the courage it represented, the willingness to sacrifice everything for family, would remain with Max forever. It was, after all, what made him not just a good dog, but a true hero.